Well, good day and welcome once again to the Genius Path. I'm Steve Bonenberger, and we're glad you're here. You know, we've got somebody on the other end of the phone that I attempted to do an interview with a few weeks ago, and the gremlins got us in it, and the message was corrupted. But he's a gracious man, and he agreed to come back, and I'm glad because his message is inside the lane, folks, and he works with the political structure of our nation, and his organization is called Capital. That's CAPITOL, capitalculture.org.
.com.
Thanks, Joel, for that. Yeah. And Joel, welcome to our show, my young friend. And if you could, first off, your grace has been received. To give a vision, let our folk know what you're doing, who you're working with, what's the big idea behind Capital Culture, sir?
Yeah, Steve, well, it's great to be with you on Genius Path. I love everything that you're doing and just honored to be able to be part of your sphere and your world and all that you're doing. Capital Culture is a work that I started a number of years ago. I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years, moved to the state of Oklahoma, and really started working with the political leadership at the state and local level in the state capitol. And the high level thing that we are doing as Oklahoma Capital Culture, and we'd love to see carried on into all 50 states and our nation, is to really work to support and encourage and equip our leaders to lead with civility, integrity, and servant leadership. And it is an undeniable problem gripping our nation right now, the incivility that has made its way not just into our politics, but it's seeping into every arena of our lives. And yet, it is undeniably true that leaders matter. Leaders play a vital role, and we look to our leaders. But the environment in which our leaders are having to work and address real problems and try to find innovative solutions is compromised with such hostility and toxicity, and yet we want better. And so Capital Culture is here to help equip both leaders and people across our state, everyday people, to change that. We are changing the tone of politics. We are changing the atmosphere and environment in which our leaders are able to do that vital work. And so that's what we do. We work with leaders and we work with people across our state to change the tone, to increase civility, to give tools to do that and actually make your voice heard in a way that will move us forward. And that's what we're doing.
Joel, you are going to come back. We're going to do this a lot of times, my young friend. The work you're doing is just so on point. His name's Joel Harder, Harder, capital CAPITOL, capitalculture.com. Go there, support this man. I always ask our audience to support the work. Joel, before we get into your book, and we're going to spend a few minutes there, I want you to talk about the big obstacles, because when I think about what you're doing, my mind automatically starts putting moats and hurdles and distance between civility and incivility. And so I want you to just, if you could, touch on some of the biggest challenges and obstacles that you stare down every single day of your work, sir.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And it's a question I ask leaders all the time. When our legislators are not in the legislative session, we're all over the state. I'm with them in their districts, and we have bipartisan legislative panel discussions all the time. And I ask them that question because we can see things driving the incivility, but there are obstacles to breaking through that. And one of the single greatest obstacle that we face is this sense that somehow when it comes to political leadership, we stop viewing them as human beings. Leaders and leadership is real. The positions of authority that they're in, there's real power that's entrusted to them in order to make our society work. But when we look at them in those positions of leadership, we forget that in God's divine design, He's made it such that human people serve in positions of authority. And so the first obstacle to overcome is to regain an ability to look at our leaders as people just like me and just like you. They are people serving in positions of leadership. And if we can remember they are people and approach them that way, we can think much more practically and in ways that we understand. How can we now encourage them and help them to lead well? The second greatest obstacle, and I think it is probably the greatest sickness in our politics, not the partisanship. It's not the political philosophies, and we don't see eye to eye. The biggest problem in our politics is that we have come to view our differences as a problem to navigate, when the reality is our differences are truly our greatest resource.
Joel, if you could, I love what you're talking about. I just love it. There's 1,000 ideas popping in my mind. We are going to address civility and incivility in another session, but I want to get to your book. I want to spend time inside of where you have spent your time, sir. And I want you to talk about your book. I want you to introduce it to our audience. I want you to talk about the big ideas that you present. I want to listen to them, sir, please.
Yeah. Well, and the book is truly laying out the philosophy of our work of capital culture. So it really is kind of that great first offering of who we are and why we exist and how we do this work. And what I discovered is, as I've worked with leaders in the state capitol, I point there because we're like 6 blocks from the state capitol.
Yeah.
As I've worked in that place, I discovered that there is an approach that I use to build real relationships with leaders, to engage them in a way that breaks through incivility, that kind of cuts through the cloud of all of the conflict in our politics, and actually does make a difference. And what I discovered is, it's not just for me. It's not just for people who are engaged in politics and are building those relationships. It's not even just for people of faith or people of prayer, but it is a 3-step approach that anyone, everyday people from all walks of life, can use. And so the book lays out really a 3-step approach that you can start using today to engage your leaders. And the first step is simply believing leaders matter. And we've already talked a little bit about that, but I really try to make that case that leaders do matter, as we've said. And if you've ever heard the line, the next election is the most important election of our lifetime, and it always is until the next one. Well, if you believe that's true, even a little bit, then you believe leaders matter, because you can understand intuitively that role they play. But remembering they're people. And then I also look at some of the problems that they face and some of the things that are obstacles that we're dealing with. But the second step is to ask more for our leaders. When we think of our democratic, process and our representative government and our ability as free people to advocate for the things we believe, we go to our leaders and we want things from them and we ask things of them. But I say, before you do that, ask more for them. And I give prayer as a way to do that. But if you're not a person of prayer, there are other ways, and I talk about them, but I am a person of prayer, and I also get to serve as a chaplain. And so I give examples of the power of prayer, and really looking at that 1 Timothy chapter 2 prayer. First of all, then pray for kings and all those in authority, giving thanks for them, making intercessions for them, which I simply say is just desiring good for them. And so it's really an example of, this is how you can pray for leaders, but pray in the way that Paul meant us to pray. And then the third step is to ask more of leaders. Okay, here we go. This is what you want. It's time to go and tell them what I want from them. But if you've taken the first 2 steps seriously, to believe they matter, remember they're people serving in positions of power and authority, and to ask more for them, then before you ask anything of them, recognize the most important thing we need of our leaders is that they are people of integrity. And so I lay out 9 qualities, 9 marks of integrity that we need in leaders. And there are more. And so I encourage anybody who's reading to keep adding to the list, but I lay out 9 marks of integrity, and they may sound familiar to you: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I lay those fruit of the Spirit as marks of integrity in leaders. And before you ask anything of them, ask that they be people of integrity. And when you see them being a person of integrity, then you have the power and opportunity to use your voice to encourage them. And when you see them lacking integrity, well, here's the beauty. If you see an area where a leader lacks integrity, now you know exactly what to ask for them. Now you
Wow.
can pray specifically and boldly for them. And I'm not naive. I sometimes our leaders do so evidently lack the integrity that we need in them that the right course of action is to replace leaders, and we have that opportunity in a democratic society. But for really my whole adult life, elections come and go, the pendulum swings. We're left to think our leaders are causing our problems, but we need new leaders, and so we elect new leaders. The pendulum swings to the other side. But what's happening? We don't sense the hostility or the incivility dissipating. It's growing. So uh, really what I'm championing and really what we're seeing play out, it's working. It's making the real impact. Is there needs to be a new approach, a new way that we think about engaging our leaders. And that's what we're doing. And that's what the book does. It kind of does a deep dive into the philosophy of this approach, the basis in First Timothy and other key areas that the Bible speaks to the way that we as Christians are to operate, and equip you with tangible, practical tactics for how to engage and be part of creating the society and the culture that we all want.
Joel Harder, I thank you for coming back, my young friend. We're going to do this many times. We're going to dive deep. We're going to do our best to be a megaphone for your work.
Oh, well, thank you.
You deserve it, sir. The work you're doing is incredible. Folks, I'm going to ask you to go to his website, capital, CAPITOL, capitalculture.com. Buy his book, When Leaders Matter. He will be back. He's a voice that needs to be heard and respected. So much to think about on this day, Joel, and yet we'll get to you. We promise we're going to do this regularly. Yeah. Till next time, I thank you, my friend, and to our audience. Well, I just love what we get to do. It's a gift from God. And so we say, go to thegeniuspath.com, thegeniuspath.com, and you can find out who we are, what we do, and why we do it. Till next time, Joel Harder has been our guest. I'm Steve Bonenberger, and this is The Genius Path. Travel far.